Next on the learning docket for this week is using arrays with methods. So last week we had a deep dive into what methods are and why you would want to use them. In general, they're for code reuse and code encapsulation. And we talked about building methods with parameters that you could pass arguments to, return types on methods so that methods can return a value. But sometimes you may want to use arrays with methods and not just regular variables. So let's build a method. As an example, static void my method. And let's define a parameter. So string display, string value to display, and we will in this method write to the screen console.writeLine. And we will call this method in our main method and write to the screen hello. So again, going through the definition, this is a static method. It's void. We're not returning anything. It's called my method, and it has one parameter, a variable value to display, and it's of type string. In this method, we're writing a line to the console, the value of value to display. And we call this method by stating the name, my method, and passing in an argument to the first parameter, a literal string hello. That value gets copied to the variable value to display, and it's displayed to the screen. So if we run this application, it will display hello to the screen. So here we passed in a string of value to display. But we could also pass in an array. So how do we do this? So let's say we want to pass in an array of strings. Let's delete our call in the main method. And instead of string, we will make it a string array. Open bracket and close bracket on the type in your method definition for that parameter. And now I guess this is values to display because we have more than one value. And in here, let's do a for each loop, string value to display in values to display. And in this, we will write to the console. Console.writeLine value to display. Alright, so what we've done is we've built a method. It's a static method. It's not returning anything. It's void. Its name is my method. And our first parameter and only parameter here is a variable named values to display of type array of strings. In this method, we're iterating for each string in the array of strings. We're writing that value to display for each element, and we're writing each element to the screen. So in our main method, we can define a string called myValues and set it to hi, good day, bye, adios. So we've created an array of strings, hi, good day, bye, adios. There are 4 elements, and we will then pass those elements to the method, my method, myValues. Now, when we run this application, you will see 4 lines written to the screen. Hi, good day, bye, and adios, because we are passing my values to my method and iterating through each element of the array and displaying it to the screen. Now I want you to take a note. When we wrote our previous method just a minute ago, we were passing the value of the variable hello as an argument to the parameter value to display. Now, when dealing with arrays, you are passing the reference. So when we talked about reference variables, we talked about using the ref keyword. It is implied when you pass an array argument to an array parameter that you are passing the reference. In the first lesson, I had mentioned this in passing, that arrays are a reference to a list of elements. You are passing the memory reference here, and I will go over an example in a moment of why that's important. So let's run this application, and you will see all 4 values written to the screen. Now, why are array parameters, why is it important to keep note that you're passing by reference? So, in here we defined hi, good day, bye, and adios. We passed these into my method, and let's say not only do we want to write the value to the screen, we also want to change the value. So before, when we wrote a method, let's get rid of this for a second. I'm going to keep this up in my brain trust over here. We'll come back to it later. So my method, let's say we had an integer, my int. And we did my int plus plus here. And we defined int some number equals 4. And then we ran console.writeLine some number. We called my method, and then we wrote this again to the screen. We're passing the value of some number into my method. So let's run this. And we see what we return is 4 and 4 because we passed a copy of the variable into the method. Now this was different when we used the ref keyword. When we added 1 to my int and we ran this application, we display 4 and 5 because we passed the memory reference, not a copy. Any change we make to the variable in that method is applied to the variable passed as the argument to that parameter. If this is a little confusing, go back to the methods video 3/4 of the way through last week. I know we had one video, and familiarize yourself again with the ref keyword. So let's talk about arrays. I had a string. Let's go with integers here. It's easier to see when we have an integer. Let's say I have an int array. Numbers equals 2. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're creating an array with 5 elements. An array of integers called numbers. So in my method, we want to accept an array of integers called input. And what we will do in here is for int counter equals 0. Counter is less than, and we're going to learn something new here. Input dot count, or length. We'll use length. You can also use count. And counter plus plus. We will then go through these numbers. Input counter, so we're going to the index of input at item counter and adding 1 to it. So what are we doing? We're iterating through each member of the array and we're adding 1 to it. Now, let's do a for each int number in numbers console.writeLine number console.writeLine. Bear with me one moment while I write this code. It'll make it a little smaller so we can fit it all on the screen. After. And then we're going to call my method and pass numbers to it. Alright. We're going to walk through the code and then we're going to see what happens. So here we declared an integer array called numbers. 5 elements, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are the values. The 0th index is 1, the first index is 2, 3, 4, and so on. We're going to write all those values to the screen. We're going to put before there. We're then going to run my method. And what does my method do? My method accepts a parameter of an array of integers as an input. And then for each of those integers, it iterates through them by the index. So we're starting at 0, we're going to the length, and we're increasing by 1. And just remember, the length, if you want the last element in an array, it's length minus 1. That's why its counter is less than input.length, while counter is less than input.length. And for each of these items, for the input array, at counter index, we're increasing it by 1. So traditionally, when we talked about passing variables to a method by value, so again, your argument variable would be passed to a method parameter by value, it was a copy of that variable. With arrays, you are passing the reference implicitly. You don't put the ref keyword, it's just always a reference. So theoretically, when we run this application, after each of these items should be increased by 1. So instead of saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it should say 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So let's run this application. So again, this proves what we said here, that the variable, when it is an array parameter in a method, is passed by reference. So if you do perform an action on an explicit element of an array passed to a method, it is passed by reference. Now, a little different. You see I wrote a for loop. Why is this important? Matt, why didn't you use a for each loop? It's easier. You just wasted my time. Well, it's a bit different, and let's see why. Let's do a for each loop. For each int value in input value plus plus. man, I've tried all this stuff. What's going on? Why can't I do anything to it? Well, because in the case of a for each loop, a copy is made of that variable and you can only read it. You cannot edit it. It will have no effect on the array reference that you passed in. So we can display the value, but we can't do anything to it. So it's a copy. And it's a read-only copy. So can't use for each if you're trying to edit it. Now you can use for each if you just want to read it. If we just want to display this to the screen or do nothing here, we can do it. So let's just display a value in method, and we will console.writeLine value. So in here you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again. There you go. So you can edit arguments passed into an array parameter to a method. Remember, it is passed by reference. If your intention is to edit those, you want to use a for loop or a while loop and access those array elements explicitly, meaning using an index. Otherwise, if you don't care and you just want to read the values, use for each. It's the best and simplest way to do it. Now, methods can also return data as an integer. So let's just say my method return new numbers equals sorry about all my copying and pasting here. So in my method, I'm going to declare int new numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in my main method, I'm going to create a variable int. It's an array numbers, but I'm not going to set it to anything. Not going to initialize it. And then what I'm going to do in my method is change it from void to an int array. And then I'm going to return new numbers equals my method, and for each Alright, so let's back up a second and walk through what I just did. I did very fast. In my main method, I declared a new variable of an integer array type called numbers, but I did not set it to anything. I did not initialize it. And then what I did, let's step out and look at the method I wrote. I created a new method. My method accepts no parameters but returns an array of integers. Inside of this method, I declared a new variable, new numbers of type integer array, and set it to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And now I'm returning it using the return keyword. Back up here, numbers equals my method, which will return an array of integers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now I'm going to iterate for each number in numbers, write it to the screen. So theoretically, if we run this application, we will see 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 written to the screen. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, one more note. Passing arrays to a method as an argument to a parameter is by reference. Passing an element of an array to a method is passed by value. So here, my method int number, and in this method we did number plus plus. And here I defined an array of integers. My array equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Would help if I put commas. Console.WriteLine, and let's write the first element of the array. My array 0. We're going to call my method and pass to it that same 0th element of the array, which is 1. And then we're going to write this value to the screen again. So what did we do here? We declared an array of integers called myArray, whose values are 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 at the 0th index to the 4th index. I wrote myArray index 0, which is 1, to the screen, so it'll display 1 on the screen. And then I called a method, myMethod. Well, what does myMethod do? MyMethod is a void method that accepts an integer value as its first parameter, which is a number, an integer called number. And in the method, I just increased number by 1, number plus plus. So here I'm calling myMethod, jumping back to main, passing the 0th element of my array into that integer value of number. And now I'm calling console.WriteLine again to show me the value of the 0th element of that array. So again, what would you expect to see here? Let's run the application. And we see 1 and 1, because again, array elements are passed by value. Arrays themselves are passed by reference. If we wanted to pass this by reference, we would treat it just like a normal variable using the ref call. So now if we run this, we should see 1 and then 2 display on the screen. Because again, in the parameter we've said ref, use the ref keyword, and when we pass the argument, we use the ref keyword. So let's run the application again, and here we see 1 and 2. So again, be careful when using methods in array definitions and using parameters, because it's passed by reference and not by value. But again, remember that array elements as parameters to methods are passed by value.